How do you defeat an enemy that seems unbeatable? A game character with the ability to steal every enemy's power? The simple answer is, you can't. Not by playing their game. The only thing you can do is to find a way to make their perfect system to lag. And to achieve that, you must be willing to break every rule. You must change the game itself. The 13th century, the Mongol Empire has forged the largest, most dominant land empire in all of human history. Now the gaze of the great Khan turns south, to a small, proud kingdom on the coast, Dai Viet. This was never just a simple conquest. It was a strategic move, a consolidation of absolute power. To win the final war for Southern Song, the Khan needed the South to kneel.
The great Khan oversees all under heaven. Bring forth the envoys.
Must learn. I have sent my most seasoned general to teach them a lesson.
In 1258, the first column, led by the veteran General Uriyangqadai, crosses the border from Yunnan. A hardened warrior from the conquest of the Dali kingdom, he was sent to end this meaningless resistance. His army was a multi-ethnic force, seasoned by decades of relentless war. Disciplined and ruthless, they were fast, they were brutal, and they did not know how to forgive. A tidal wave of steel and fury now aimed directly at the heart of the Vietnamese kingdom. In the capital, Thung Long, Emperor Tran Thai Tong understood the deadly peril his people were facing. A direct confrontation on an open field would be nothing short of national suicide.
The Song dynasty could not hold. What defense is left to us?
But the emperor, in a desperate gamble, decides to stand. At Binh Nguyen, the forces of Dai Viet prepare for the impossible. This battle would be watched by a young, brilliant general, a man named Tran Quoc Tuan. It was a fatal test. A brutal lesson for a new generation of commanders. Paid for in blood, the northern border has fallen. The storm has truly arrived. The battle line is drawn. On one side, the unstoppable Mongol war machine. On the other, the desperate helmeted defenders of Dai Viet. The Vietnamese commanders unleash their secret weapon, war elephants, ancient tanks of flesh and bone. Uriyangqadai, however, has seen elephants before. He is not impressed by this local tactic. General Tran Quoc Tuan watches, knowing this first engagement will decide the fate of the capital. The charge is devastating. The elephants tear through the Mongol front lines, crushing cavalry beneath their feet. For a moment, it seems the tide might turn. The Mongol lines bend, but they do not break. Uriyangqadai calmly gives the order. A storm of arrows is unleashed from the Mongol flanks. But these are not ordinary arrows. They are wrapped in flame, aimed not to kill the elephants, but to enrage them. The plan works perfectly. The panicked elephants, blind with pain, turn and trample their own infantry. The Vietnamese formation collapses completely. The battle is lost in a cloud of smoke and chaos. General Tran Quoc Tuan witnesses the total failure of traditional tactics. A brutal lesson is learned. Emperor Tran Thai Tong is forced to flee the battlefield. The road to the capital, Thang Long, is now wide open.
We follow the river to the capital. Thang Long is the key to victory.
Back in the capital, the emperor must make an impossible, agonizing choice. He gives the order, evacuate the city. Every man, woman, and child must leave. But more than that, destroy everything. Deny the enemy their prize. Leave nothing. This is the Scorched Earth strategy, a tactic that will win the war by sacrificing the homeland. Uriyangqadai leads his victorious army into Thung Long, expecting a triumphant surrender. Instead, he finds a ghost town, an empty city, silent and stripped bare of all supplies. There is no food, no supplies, no plunder for his starving army. The Mongols have captured the capital, but they have walked directly into a trap. The invaders, cut off from supplies and plagued by tropical diseases, begin to weaken and die. The game has lagged. The rules of war have been broken by the Vietnamese. And in the shadows of the jungle, the true Vietnamese resistance was just beginning. Small, relentless ambushes strike the Mongol patrols and their desperate supply lines. The hunter has now officially become the hunted. While the Mongols weakened in the city, the Dai Viet forces regrouped, not on land, but on water. General Tran Quoc Tuan, now on his command boat, prepared his hidden fleet for a decisive strike. Emperor Tran Thai Tong stood on the riverbank, placing his trust in this new, fluid naval strategy. The Dai Viet soldiers were no longer retreating. Their faces were set with grim determination. A fleet of agile, fast Dai Viet warboats began to move swiftly down the Red River towards the unsuspecting enemy. Back in Thang Long, a weary Uriyangqadai received panicked reports. The Dai Viet forces were counterattacking. His troops, decimated by sickness and hunger, were in no condition to fight a new, organized battle. Their heavy, clumsy transport ships were moored at the Bo Dau wharf, completely vulnerable. The Mongol general desperately ordered his disorganized ground troops to the riverbank, but it was too late. The Battle of Bo Dau began. The swift Dai Viet boats swarmed the larger Mongol vessels. Using long poles and hooks, the Dai Viet soldiers boarded the enemy ships, turning the river into a battlefield. Mongol archers on the bank tried to provide cover, but their arrows were ineffective against the fast-moving Dai Viet boats. General Tran Quoc Tuan pointed his sword forward, signaling the all-out assault. Dai Viet infantry leaped onto the Mongol decks, fighting with spears and swords in brutal close-quarters combat. The heavily armored Mongol soldiers had no advantage on the water. Many fell overboard, weighed down by their own steel. The Mongol fleet was devastated. Several ships were set ablaze, sinking into the river. From the riverbank, Uriyangqadai watched in horror as his fleet, his main supply line, was annihilated. He made the only decision he could. He grabbed his horse's reins and ordered a full, desperate retreat by land. The Mongol army, once the proud conquerors, broke formation and fled north in a panicked rout. A Mongol banner, symbol of an empire, sank quietly into the river mud. The Dai Viet warboats had secured the river. The capital was theirs once more. But for Emperor Tran Thai Tong, the victory was bittersweet. As he looked at the ruins of his burnt capital, the retreating Mongol army struggled through the dense, muddy jungles they had entered so confidently. The sick and the weak were left behind, abandoned by their comrades in the desperate flight. The silhouette of the once invincible army disappeared over the horizon, utterly defeated. The map of Dai Viet was clear once more. The red arrow of the invaders was in full retreat, heading north. As the dust settled, General Tran Quoc Tuan analyzed the spoils of war. His mind was already moving past the victory, analyzing the enemy's craftsmanship, their strengths, their weaknesses. The Emperor Tran Thai Tong joined him on the riverbank, the immediate danger having passed. The two men, the heart and the mind of Dai Viet, surveyed the heavy cost of their freedom. But as the emperor looked away from the victory, he saw the grim reminder of the price they had paid. Thang Long, his capital, was still a smoking ruin, sacrificed for this very moment. The Mongol army, or what was left of it, was finally driven from the borders of Dai Viet. The land was quiet once more. The first storm had been weathered. The map of Dai Viet was clear. The first invasion had been repelled. But this was not a total victory. The Mongol Empire, vast and vengeful, still surrounded them. That night, General Tran Quoc Tuan did not celebrate. He returned to his command tent. He knew this was only the beginning. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The captured Mongol helmet served as a constant reminder of the enemy's strength. And as he planned, he knew the Mongols would return. 27 years passed. Thang Long, once ashes, was rebuilt. Peace returned to Dai Viet. A new generation was born, unfamiliar with the horrors of the First War. General Tran Quoc Tuan, his skill forged in that first fire, spent these years preparing. He trained a new army, teaching them not just how to fight, but how to think. But while Dai Viet rebuilt, the world changed. The Mongol Empire had finally crushed the last resistance of the Southern Song. The empire was renamed. It was no longer the Mongol horde. It was the vast, organized Yuan dynasty. And Kublai Khan was no longer just a Khan. He was the absolute emperor of a unified China. He was older now, more powerful. And he had a long memory. From his grand palace, he ruled over the largest empire on earth. But one small failure, one humiliation from 27 years ago, still haunted him.
27 years. They have been allowed to live in peace for 27 years. This time, I will not send a general. I will send a storm.
This would not be a border skirmish. This was a full-scale imperial invasion. Hundreds of thousands of troops, the best of the new Yuan dynasty, were mobilized. New ruthless commanders were chosen, veterans of the Song campaign, eager to please their emperor. And this time, they would not just come by land. A massive Yuan fleet, the largest in the world, was assembled. These were not the weary troops of Uriyangqadai. This was a fresh, disciplined, and technologically superior force. Their cavalry was elite. Their infantry, the backbone of the defeated Song, now marched for their new master. The plan was simple, a massive pincer movement. The army would crush Dai Viet from the north, while the fleet blockaded and attacked from the sea. In Thang Long, General Tran Quoc Tuan looked at the reports. He knew. The storm was returning, but this time, he was not a young general learning a lesson. He was the Quoc Kong Tietche. He was ready. The old generation, those who remembered the First War, felt the familiar dread. Fear began to spread. How could their small kingdom possibly survive this? But fear, Bo, was tempered by preparation. Dai Viet had spent 27 years sharpening its own spears. The Yuan army reached the border, a river of steel pouring south. They filled the valleys, a force so vast it seemed to blot out the sun. The Yuan fleet appeared on the horizon, a forest of masts covering the ocean. Back in his palace, Kublai Khan waited. He had given the order. Total annihilation.
They taught me a lesson in Scorched Earth. This time, I will teach them extermination.
The vanguard of the Yuan army smashed through the border defenses. The first ships of the Yuan fleet entered Dai Viet's waters. On the walls of his fortress, General Tran Quoc Tuan watched them come. The second, and greatest, war had begun. The first invasion was over. A massive Mongol army, defeated and humiliated, fled back north. For General Uriyangqadai, it was an impossible defeat, a stain on his honor. For Emperor Tran Thai Tong, it was a victory, but one paid for with the ashes of his own capital.
He will return. He They only don't wait They will pay for this humiliation. They will pay.
But would Kublai Khan, now the most powerful man on earth, simply abandon Dai Viet? Or would this act of defiance, this humiliation, only guarantee a more terrifying return? The answer, it will be waiting. In episode 2.